Hello and welcome everyone to Seeking Delphi. This is the first in an intended series of programs called the Longevity Dialogues. Uh, and we begin with implementation and implications, the long view. I'm Mark Sackler, and as always, the future lives here. Back in January, I did a web panel for Seeking Delphi with Aubrey de Grey, David Wood, who joins me again today, Liz Parrish, and Keith Comito on the dawn of superlongevity, scenarios for a post-aging future. And in 90 minutes, we barely scratched the surface of all the things I would have liked to have talked about, even in that 90 minutes. And as Sergey Young, who's one of our panelists, knows, I gave him a 2-page list of questions back at the XPrize last year, and I'm constantly thinking of more of them. So I realized, partly inspired by a comment that Aubrey made at one of the seminars that Leaf gave early in the year, that it's time to really get into the implications. We have to start discussing them now. We have to start advising the public and discussing it among ourselves. What happens when we get there? So with that in mind, this is going to be a series of dialogues, various voices, various stakeholders on various issues. We're going to start with a couple of overarching questions today, but first let's meet the panel. And we'll start with the aforementioned Sergey Young, who I had the pleasure of spending 2 days with at the XPrize Longevity, workshop, roadmap workshop in Southern California. He is an innovation board member of the XPrize and also founded and runs the Longevity Vision Fund. Sergey, thank you for joining me today.
Mark, hi everyone. I'm so excited to be here.
Then we have Jose Cordeiro, who's giving me the thumbs up over there. Jose is the author of La Muerte de la Muerte, which he co-authored with David Wood, and is a former candidate for the European Parliament and a major longevity advocate in Europe. Jose, glad to have you for an extended visit after we met you at Undoing Aging last year.
The same, a pleasure to be with all of you, and I am wearing my mask as a symbol of war against COVID. But now that I made my point, I can actually take it out. But we are on a war against COVID, and even more important, against aging and death.
And we'll get into how COVID kind of links with the aging issue in a minute. But finally, I want to get to somebody who is clearly a very familiar face to my regular listeners, David Wood. He's been on Seeking Delphi several times, the author of Abolition of Aging. We actually first met at the last really big World Future Society meeting in 2016. David also chairs the London Futurist. David, welcome back, and always fun to have you on.
Thanks, Mark, for arranging such an important discussion on a really important topic.
Well, guys, I want to start with implementation, but first, because this is such a large problem with so many potential scenarios, I'd like to do a futurist thing and consider a potential scenario. And of course, I just found out, Sergey, that your book is going to deal with scenarios to 2040. So I'm going to ask you if the one I'm talking about here is feasible. There it is, Jose holding it up. If the one that I'm talking about is feasible, but let's assume it's the mid to the late 2030s, that a variety of therapies have been developed and shown effective to stop and even reverse many of the aspects of aging. We may not yet be to what Aubrey de Grey calls the aging escape velocity, whereby longevity escape velocity, whereby average life expectancy is increasing by more than 1 year per year. But let's assume that we can add several decades, not only to healthy average lifespan, but even to maximum lifespan. But we're also going to assume that it is not a simple single pill, that it may be a variety of therapies to address a variety of things. There may be vaccines, genetic editing. Perhaps optimistic, but certainly feasible, Sergey, would you say?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think we just discussed with Terry Grossman and with Aubrey, how our anti-aging world has changed in the last 10 years. So if you think, about 10, 15 years from now, what we're going to have, I'm pretty sure we're going to have longevity in the pill. And we have two generic candidates these days, whether it's metformin or rapamycin or any other generics that will go through the trial, and therefore their time to market is actually short enough to hit this 10, 15 years horizon. So that's one. If we're going to have completely new drug, then it's going to be as a result of using artificial intelligence and machine learning in drug discovery, rather than using kind of old style 2.5 billion, 12 years drug development cycle. So that's longevity in the pill aspect of that. I'm pretty sure if you think about, regenerative medicine is going to be more and more organ regeneration and, organ transplantation solutions, like the technology that we currently supporting, like, done by a company called like Genesis, where you can replace your organs and actually use your lymph nodes as bioreactors to regrow liver or any other important organs. I'm pretty sure we'll have breakthroughs in the stem cells therapies, and gene therapy, gene editing is another important point. And I also think that we're gonna make a few more steps in terms of integrating our brain with computer, with artificial intelligence. We have this integration today with our smartphones, where we're just using completely inefficient interfaces for this, which is our eyes and our ears. So that's integration, and actually the opportunity to develop the digital versions of us in the form of digital avatars or physical robotic avatars is another promising area. So I think combination of this, these breakthroughs that we're currently seeing in the early stage of their development will dramatically change our ability to extend healthy and happy portion of our life.
And I want to get into how we're physically going to implement that when we have it, but I just want to know if either Jose or David has anything to add about where we might be in the mid to late 2030s in terms of the science.
So I agree.
Okay, let me just say quickly, because with my co-author, David Good, we talk about that a little bit in our book, that I have the pleasure, the honor that Sergey Young has written the prologue for the Russian edition that should be coming out soon. Actually, it was going to come out next month, but because of the pandemic, it has been delayed. But anyway, in our book, The Death of Death, we talk about immortality. And actually, I like to talk about not one immortality, but two immortalities. Immortality of the hardware and immortality of the software. As Sergey was talking, we are going to have a computational immortality. We might be able to copy our brains, our memories. So that is the computational software immortality. And also we have the biological hardware immortality. And it is very interesting if we take two leaders of each movement. Aubrey de Grey is the leader of the biological immortality, and Ray Kurzweil is the leader of the computational immortality. But both of them think that this is feasible between the next 2 to 3 decades, which is beautiful. So we will have two immortalities in 2 to 3 decades. And that's my point of view. And my co-author also has many interesting ideas. David.
So I still think there's about a 50% chance we will have affordable, available, good quality rejuvenation therapies by 2040. I said as much 5 years ago, and I'm sticking with that, even though we're now closer to 2040 than before. And part of the reason for that optimism is that more people all the time are joining this field. If we go back to the 1980s, the number of people who were seriously working on anti-aging was probably measured on the palm of a hand. Of course, there were many other people who made wild claims, but without much scientific rigor and backup. But since the 1980s, at least tenfold growth every decade. And so now there are tens of thousands of people actually working on all aspects of healthy longevity. And I think in the 2020s and 2040s, we will be approaching 1 million people working. Why? Because increasingly they can see there are real results being achieved and the benefits will be enormous. So people from all fields, the cosmetics fields, the athletics fields, the military, the IT companies, as well as the traditional pharmaceuticals and many more, they will say we should be part of what's growing into the most significant, largest industrial movement of all time. But it's not taken for granted. This could go wrong in many ways. People could become disheartened. There could be setbacks. And so that's why we have to keep telling the story as to positive scenarios. And we have to answer the queries that people have about negative scenarios, because some of these queries are reasonably well motivated. They're not just all people who are afraid of change. They are apprehensive about a number of things that we might talk about. And we have to keep on rolling out good, compelling answers to turn people from being skeptical into increasingly well-informed and enthusiastic.
Thank you, guys. And boy, there's a whole bunch of additional questions that could come out of that. And those are ones we're going to get to in future dialogues, not in this one. Because, okay, that's where we might be in the 2035 to 2040 range in terms of therapies. But let's talk about something. And again, I'm going to start with Sergey, because as a venture capitalist who's investing in some of these technologies, you want to get a return. And you have to have thought about the actual implementation. And I think COVID-19 gives us a potential dry run. It's not just that we got to find effective and safe therapies. We have to produce them, distribute them, administer them, and convince everybody to take them. So this could actually be a dry run for some of the global problems of implementing multiple, some simple as a pill, but some much more complicated longevity therapies. So Sergey, your thoughts on this? What are you looking at to learn from COVID, and how do you think we can apply it going forward?
Yeah. Well, first of all, COVID was and is a huge wake-up call for us, for someone who wants to fight aging, right? Because of the extreme sensitivity of the older part of the population to COVID, right? So that's, I think, the transformation of the mindset in many ways. This is what has been brought by COVID to this world. So, and if you look at COVID case that we all going through, there's a number of important changes that the recent coronavirus cases brought to this world. So, well, first of all, it's just degree of regulatory innovations that we see, right? Look at the approval cycle, really squeeze approval cycle for some of the therapies or for tests as well. In 1 or 2 months time, the number of and different types of tests which became available to us is just enormous. This is nowhere near all the previous pandemics that we experienced. So that's one. Well, the second one is our ability to use science, and this is combination of actually technology and science. Just a few weeks later, we've been able to sequence genome of this virus, which help us actually it's important input for testing and building up our testing capabilities, or to think about different type of therapies which is in development. So that's important as well. Third, I think, is important change which has been brought by different type of partnerships that we build. Our approach to fighting COVID, which was much more cooperative and partnership based than we've seen in the previous 5 to 10 years in the world, right? Former enemies in the pharmaceutical area joined their own forces. The companies who never produced sanitizers like Dior, Gucci, LVMH started to produce sanitizers. Ford, General Motors, Mercedes started to produce breathing aids. So that's just important point of when we join forces and try to fight and win the war, as Jose, where he started our conversation today. And the fourth important thing is just the enormous use of technology that we can enjoy, and we can engage in trying to, you know, fight COVID in the most effective and timely way, like using artificial intelligence to create, you know, novel molecules that that can help us to develop like new drugs, or to think about what are the best candidates of the current drugs that can be repurposed. So the use of technology, whether it's AI or machine learning, is super important.
Let me ask David, have you thought about some of these logistical problems in terms of implementation? And again, Sergey didn't even discuss convincing people to do it. We have people that
Oh yeah,
won't take won't take a
huge
vaccine,
problem.
and there may be people that don't want longevity therapy for religious or for philosophical reasons.
So one thing that we can learn from the coronavirus situation is that we don't yet have vaccines ready for any coronavirus, sadly. And we had some initial investigations into previous coronaviruses, such as SARS, but none of them developed into a successful vaccine that's been fully tried. Why is that the case? And it turns out it's not just the issues of the certification and trials, it's also the lack of the financial business case in many companies to go through what's often a very difficult and process, and it's unlikely to guarantee them a commercial return. But we can now see, oh, we are really on the back foot because we don't have the mechanisms available to quickly roll out a new vaccine. We're going to get one fairly soon, but if we'd had more research beforehand, we could have got there more quickly. Especially people speculate about a generic vaccine, a vaccine that could work against all coronaviruses. Why don't we have that? Again, it's because of people not being convinced there's been a commercial case to go after it. Whereas the free market has done lots of wonderful things in prioritizing the development of all kinds of new therapies, it has not always been able to address various illnesses. There's a whole bunch of neglected diseases, which some public bodies, such as the DNDi, the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, with funding from various governments, including the Malaysian government and the WHO and Médecins Sans Frontières, they've done wonderful work addressing diseases that afflict millions of very poor people every year. So there's no commercial case for developing these therapies. So one wake-up call from the coronavirus is we've got to shift more public funding ahead of time to support the private funds. It's going to be a dual thing, things that Sergey is already working on, how to get public and private funding cooperating and reinforcing each other. And if we can do that, it's not just that we'll have treatments, but we'll have treatments that are increasingly at a low and affordable cost. Because one reason people reject therapies is out of a sense of, well, they're unfair, they're only available for rich people, and we don't like that. But once it becomes clear that these therapies are very low cost, then I think more people's skepticism will vanish. And the final thing that's going to push people from being a skeptic to being an enthusiast is when they can see people in their own group, in their own community saying, you know, I used to be skeptical about this, but I've looked at the science and now I think it's good. My family members are going to take this anti-aging treatments or other vaccines for different viruses, and it's going to lead people to flip over. And the flip can happen pretty fast. You know, it's not just the technology can change fast, social attitudes can change fast, provided the influences of these various communities can change over. So part of our outreach isn't just to everybody on the planet at the same level. Part of our outreach is particularly looking to influence the key influencers, to educate the educators, and to motivate the people who can in turn motivate their own communities. And that's how I see we're going to eventually get enough public and private funding together, allowing us these therapies to be widely available and widely adopted. Of course, if people don't want them, that's entirely their choice. But my prediction is more and more people are going to flip over and say, you know what? It's actually going to be good to allow their grandparents or their parents or their aunts and uncles or even themselves to live longer. I think they'll waken up and smell the bacon, so to speak.
As it was mentioned, I think that COVID-19 is a call to action, a call to arms. That is why I have my arm here, the mask. For the first time in history, this is a globalized, very quick pandemic. And it is estimated that it is costing $11 trillion. $11 trillion. This is an incredible amount of money. And also COVID is related to aging. The #1 risk factor to die is age. So all diseases in general, but certainly COVID is related to aging. And if we are spending $11 trillion on COVID, imagine all that we have to spend on all other diseases which are based on aging. And two more things is that people don't realize the exponential technologies and how things are moving really, really fast exponentially. One, as David mentioned, first, there were a very few scientists working on this. Only a couple of decades ago, you could count them in one hand. Then it went to hundreds. Now it is in the order of thousands. And soon it will be millions of scientists researching on age-related diseases, age-related topics. Another thing about the exponentiality factor is, let's remember AIDS, HIV. When it appeared in the 1980s, it was the perfect disease because it had no cure and because it attacked the immune system and you would die. It was a death sentence. And it took actually years, over 2 years, to finally discover the virus and sequence the virus. 2 years. Then when the first SARS-MERS pandemic came about 2 decades ago, it took 2 months. So it went from 2 years to 2 months. And now COVID-19 was sequenced in only 2 weeks. So from 2 years to 2 months to 2 weeks, and I'm pretty sure the next pandemic in a couple of years will be sequenced in 2 days, and the following one in 2 hours. And we will be prepared for controlling the virus, the pandemic. And my hope is that this will actually be the last pandemic in human history, the last pandemic, because we will be prepared for the next one coming. And I repeat, $11 trillion is a lot of money.
Good stuff, guys. And something was brought up there that can kind of be a segue into the next question on the implications. And that was, you know, some people opting not to get the therapy, at least at first. Because, you know, with COVID, there's a certain level we have to get to for the herd immunity for the good of global health. You don't necessarily have that same issue with longevity therapies, but you have the issue, what happens if you have people who are living 150, 200 years indefinitely and people who are still living 70, 80, 90 years? How does that affect society? And how does that, you know, does that start to put pressure on the non-compliant? You might look at it as non-compliant, but there might be eventually pressure on them to do it. And I wonder if you guys have contemplated the issues with a split society. We won't even consider the fact that at first it might not be available, affordable to everybody. Let's assume it is. You've still got the issues of how do you deal with a lot of the social issues with people that are still having the same diseases and people that are living almost indefinitely. And Sergey, you're nodding your head, so I'm going to start with you again.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Well, first of all, I do think if you look at the cycle of affordability or democratization of cost for different technologies and interventions. So this is happening in 10, 20 years. So think about cell phones, right? 20, 30 years ago, it was $10,000 a piece, and only just few people in the society can really afford this. Right now, I mean, you can buy the cheap version of this, you know, smartphone in China on the electronic market in Shenzhen for like $10. And this is all happened in the course 20, 25 years. So I do think the not only product development or intervention development cycles are becoming shorter and shorter, but also our ability to offer this at affordable and accessible price and make it available for everyone is pretty high. So I do believe that while initially it might be expensive, given the positive impact on human health, on the economics of healthcare, on the government finances, the level of democratization and affordability of this going to be pretty high. I just had a chat with Nir Barzilai, a good friend of mine, who's working on the same trial, which is metformin. A funny fact is cost of metformin is actually, for that trial, is actually cheaper than the cost of placebo. So, you know, we're obviously talking about generic drug, but it's pretty symbolic example that, you know, we always have this kind of pictures full of fear, you know, about the future. But in the end of the day, I think whatever has a value on a global scale very quickly become cheap and affordable. So this is the way the world works today. I don't know if David and Kosa have different views on that.
Well, let me chime in though. I think in the long run, you're probably going to see that virtually everybody will do it, if only because there's almost an evolutionary thing here. The people who, for whatever reasons, don't want to do it are going to die out, and the people who do it are going to take over. I think it's more of a transition, even if it is affordable. As I said, you've got the religious and the philosophical reasons, the pro-aging trance, for example, as Aubrey de Grey calls it. So I'm just curious, David or Jose, have you thought about what it could be like in those transitional issues? I see David raising his hand, so go ahead.
Well, let me talk about adoption of smartphones and mobile phones, because 25 years ago, there were many people who had almost a religious opposition to mobile phones or smartphones. They say, I don't want people to be able to ring me up. I want to be in charge. I'm going to come home and make my phone calls. What do I need with an app, with apps? I don't need this kind of thing. I'm more than happy to go and use a fixed call. And there were commercial reasons as well. In America, strangely enough, if somebody called you, you had to pay for the privilege of answering the call, which is another reason why people hated it. So, and myself and colleagues who were heavily involved in the early days of the smartphones, we said, well, you can choose, you know. And almost everybody I knew at that time who swore that they'd never want to take advantage of a mobile phone or a smartphone is now, with pleasure, taking these things around. Of course, they dislike other aspects of them, and we could talk about that too, but on the whole, people are very glad that they can remain in touch with information. There's mapping and there's entertainment. They can see pictures of their grandchildren easily when they're on the move. So attitudes will change, but nevertheless, we must support diversity. What's this whole point of this technology? It's about giving people liberty and choice. You know, liberty to not die, liberty to choose their own lifestyles. And if people have their own reasons for not wanting to take advantage of various things, we must make it possible for them to do so. And there won't just be two classes or two groups of people, the ones who take this therapy and those who don't. There'll be many other choices in society in the future. And if we look ahead to this world in which there are many longevity therapies, we must be sure that we can cope with lots of diversity, people coexisting. And it's maybe troubling for some who prefer a simpler world in which all neighbors were the same and everybody went to the same church and told the same jokes and watched the same TV and had the same diet. Well, guess what? We are becoming more used to and more comfortable with diversity, and it's going to be the same with attitudes towards longevity too, in my view.
Let me continue and give very quick four answers to that. The first one is to ratify what Sergey and David said about this being exponential. Like Ray Kurzweil says, all technologies, when they begin, they are expensive and bad. But when they are democratized, they are cheap and they are very good. So sadly, actually, the first immortal might not be that immortal after all. He might die because the technology is not well developed. That's reason number one. Number two, like Elon Musk would say, we need to go down to the basics, to the fundamentals. And what are we human beings? We are actually water bags. We are water bags. We are 70% water. And besides the water that we are, hydrogen and oxygen, we have 6 of the most common and cheap elements in nature: carbon, nitrogen, calcium, potassium. We are really water bags. A human being in raw materials, we don't cost $100. And if we don't cost $100, to maintain something that is cheap will be cheap once we have the technologies. Another answer, also, we are going to flip the way we treat medicine. Instead of putting a lot of money when you are going to die, because 80% of the medical cost is when you are going to die, and you still die after spending 80% of the money, we are going to put that money at the beginning so that you do not age. And if you do not age, you don't need to spend all that money at the end, because there will be no end to your youth. And finally, which is also Aubrey's point, which is very relevant. Once these technologies become available, they will be unstoppable politically. Because if a politician does not support youth for everybody who wants it, he will not be in power for very long. So once we get to that point, which is very quick, there is a tipping point from 0 to 100% almost. Politically, this will be 100% a good cause. No one would oppose this.
Well, it's hard to argue with any of that. I guess the proof will be in the pudding. We really don't know until it happens, but undoubtedly there will be a transition, but hopefully there will be a major longevity dividend. So let's use that to segue to a, this is probably a question we could spend hours talking about, but I think as part of the long view, assuming we have, never mind, 120, 150 years, what happens if we have indefinite years to the very trajectory of human life and human meaning? Now, for those of us here talking and observing this, we all are kind of intellectually engaged. We're engaged with the world, and we have so much we want to do. We'll have no trouble finding meaning in our life for decades and even centuries. But I don't know who it was that said, I don't remember now, but I quoted this in the webinar back in January, that millions log for immortality that have no idea what to do with themselves on a rainy Sunday afternoon. So with this one, I know I've discussed it with David, and I sent Sergey some questions on that back at the XPrize, but I want to give Jose a chance to start first on that one. Where do you see that going, and some of the life trajectories, like retirement? Maybe you work and then retire for a while and then work a new career, who knows? But I'd like to know your thoughts on it.
Fantastic. And for that question, I have two answers. The first one is that I not only talk about life extension, I talk about life expansion, I would love to talk with Sergey in Russian, but I cannot speak Russian because I don't have time to learn Russian. And I want to live indefinitely so I can learn Russian, and I can read The Death of Death in Russian. So it's not just extension, but expansion of the possibilities we want to do. People love to travel. People love to learn things, to eat, to watch movies, to listen to music. And once we have life expansion, we will be able to do all those things. So the other point, again, is that it is not just quantity of life. It is also the quality of life. And we are moving up through Abraham Maslow's pyramid of needs. We are moving from survival into self-realization, self-actualization. And I think this is the future of humanity. Once we overtake our human animal condition, we will become more and better. And that is moving from just quantity into quality of life, with the expansion of our abilities, and me being able to speak in Russian.
I got to say, Jose, I've thought about that issue about speaking many languages, but I'd love to speak. I speak a little bit of Spanish, not as much as I'd like to. I'd like to be fluent in maybe a couple of other languages, but then it also brought to mind the possibility that we might have that little thing you put in your ear that translates everything automatically, like in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by 2040. You never know, but that's okay too. David or Sergey, you have anything you want to add to that human meaning issue?
So I look forward not just to physical rejuvenation, but I look forward to many similar technologies being used to give us mental rejuvenation, emotional rejuvenation, and dare I say it, spiritual rejuvenation. The purpose that we can find in our lives will be at much higher levels and will involve people far from being bored. They will be enchanted by all kinds of new possibilities. It's not just that we will be doing the same thing as today, only longer, and having longer lives, but still going to work and still eating slaughtered animals and so forth. On the contrary, we will use the same sorts of technology, nanotech, biotech, cognitech, and infotech, to transform our diets, transform our working environments, transform our entertainment. And so it won't just be a few people who are interested in the glories of music and philosophy and mathematics and exploring the universe. More and more people will become turned on to that. And it is my experience that often when we initially meet people and we think, oh, they're quite small-minded, they're quite pedestrian, they don't have much going on in their lives, that's often a reflection of them being in a pretty miserable situation. But give them a chance and they can flourish. And what this set of technologies and therapies is going to do in the next couple of decades is open up many new angles for people. So it will not be today's quality of life extended. It will be, to use Jose's word, an expansion. It won't just be human lives, it'll be a transhuman lives. And it'll be like a step up from the apes to the humans. We can see the transhuman and posthumans of just a few decades in the future will be as much of a leap up in consciousness and experience.
And finally, Sergey, I'll let you finish things up if you have anything to say on that meaning issue.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a fascinating question, and I'm pretty sure our world gonna be different when a radical form of longevity will be available to us. So similar to the old days thing, I mean, to have some food, you would need to do hunting or do agriculture. Not now. We're gonna redefine our relationship with work and retirement, right? So work gonna be an optionality for you, given that we're gonna be living in a world of universal basic income or any other scheme of redistribution of resources to support our basic needs. So, and then I agree with David, I agree with Jose, we're gonna have massive amounts of time to realize our dreams rather than we would be need to work or to have agricultural engagement. Now we can, what I'm sure about the world of the future, people will not gonna die because of cancer or heart disease. People will have 1, 2, or 3 years to go to the moon or to go to Mars. We will be able to live to 150 or 200 years with only 5 or 10% of our initial content given us by Mother Nature. And obviously we'll have series of mini lives when we can reset what we've done before and learning kind of new skills. And obviously, it's going to be different type of marriage. It's going to be more, kids-based partnerships rather than, old social institution that we've seen. And what I'm sure though, that given where inflation going, we're all going to be billionaires.
Well, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad. We don't want to be billionaires like Germany in the 1930s. They were trillionaires, and they had to be to buy a loaf of bread.
I think the common theme for 3 of us, and Mark will probably join, it's going to be time for many of us to realize our dreams.
We may not be trillionaires, but we'll be living in a world of superabundance. The things that are necessary for a very good quality of life will be essentially free in most cases because they're being generated by automation, harvesting the energy from the sun, harvesting materials and recreating them from waste in a very wonderful way.
Well, we can only hope, guys. I'm with you in advocating all this stuff, and advocating it sooner than later, since I'm getting to that age before you guys. So I want to thank everybody, Jose, David, and Sergey, as well as our handful of observers, and look forward to having this up on YouTube and on Seeking Delphi in very quickly. Thanks again, guys.
My
pleasure, and live long and prosper.